Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. This is Eight-Sided Freaks. Today we have a long-awaited news episode. We haven't had a news episode in a minute. And last week, Jerry and I talked very briefly about UFC 314. We didn't really say much other than, hey, we need a main event here soon. The card's coming up, and we don't have a main event. Coming to find out, we have a lot of fights for UFC 314. Ended up being a great fight card. We also had Ilia Topuria vacate the featherweight title. And then we have UFC 315 announcements. And we also have tomorrow is UFC Seattle. So we kind of have a lot on the plate for today. We're going to focus on the news, the fight announcements, title being vacated, UFC signing Pitbull. That's going to be the focus today because, frankly, those types of days are more rare than fight previews, even if tomorrow's previews would be a good card to preview. So with whatever time we have left, we're going to hit the UFC Seattle main event between Cejudo and Song Yadong. Then we'll go from there based on time. So that is the plan for today. And we'll start it off right at what in my opinion, is the biggest news. Ilia Topuria vacating the 145-pound belt. Decision was made to move up to 155, citing the weight cut. So that is where we're at with Topuria. This has long been what are they doing with Topuria? Is he going to defend 145? Are they going to give him the double champ fight? Ended up being a vacate and move up with the plan being to fight Islam, but that is not official. So that's where we're sitting at the moment. Anthony, we can throw it over to you first. What do you make of this situation with Ilia Topuria and the decisions that have been made thus far?
Well, I think we all had kind of talked about it in the recap of last year's and then the preview for this year. But I think we had kind of all decided by the end of the year, we figured we'd see Topuria move up. I just thought I wanted that Lopes fight because he knocked off the two of the GOATs in Volkanovski and Holloway. And so I wanted to see him beat one of the newer up-and-comers. Or if anything, we were probably going to get that Volk rematch, which wouldn't have been my favorite, but was understood. So this way, I mean, it just, takes it out of it. We're still getting what we wanted in Topuria moving up eventually. And the thing that I was always stuck with, too, was if he doesn't feel comfortable making the weight and all that stuff, which I think I saw something on it today that he came out and kind of resaid that, or maybe Dana said it for him. Someone said that. But then it's truly, I think, justified and understandable now. As much as I could be greedy and want him to fight, one more person at that weight class, get one more defense. I mean, if he thinks that's what's best for him, and I know he doesn't want to have the longest UFC career, he wants to, get in and get out. Then it makes sense because if he feels he can't make the weight or he's not going to be comfortable or at his best at that weight, then I'd rather just see him move up. And like we've also said too, there's 1,000 fights you could make up there for him. So.
Yeah, and I think that last part that you mentioned is part of why I'm fine with this. And I haven't heard him come out and talk much about it since Dana White made the announcement of him vacating and all this stuff. So it seems like he probably wants to go up for the Islam fight, but he isn't one that it's not like he's demanding, I have to go up, I have to fight for the belt. It seems like he's more taking the Alex Pereira route when he moved up, even though he didn't move up as the champion to light heavyweight from middleweight, still moved up after having held the belt. And as far as it goes, sure, you only have one title defense at 145, but you did also just beat the two of, if not the two greatest featherweights of all time in back-to-back fights, and didn't just beat them, you knocked them out cold, both of them. So understandable. I'm fine seeing him move up. I think it's going to be an absolute blast, whether it is fighting a guy like, I know some of these guys will be booked, but whether it's fighting like Islam, fighting a Justin Gaethje, something like that any of those guys would be a blast. I'm curious to see I don't know if he would fight Dustin Poirier for Poirier's retirement fight. I don't know if that's a fight Poirier would necessarily want to take, but there's a whole nother option. It's just another fight. As you said, Anthony, there's so many fights we can make. It just makes it interesting because I personally think he would have beaten both Diego Lopes and Movsar Evloev had he fought them at 145. There's a little more question now about how he's going to transition over to 155. The one guy I feel terrible for, poor Max Holloway. You get knocked after getting the BMF belt. Now you move up a division. You're like, okay, I can finally kind of do my own thing. This guy that just comes and knocks you out for the first time in your career just follows you right up and is pretty much going to be right in the same area of the rankings.
Yeah, and to back off that point for Holloway, Holloway is also not going up out of like, I want to go fight at 155. It's like he's also in the same weight cut situation. Yeah. So he's not like, I'll just go back down. Like that's really off the table for him. So he doesn't even have that card. Because if you're Holloway, if he could go back to 45, like
now's the time.
Great. Like who knows how he fares against grapplers, but like I don't think anyone's striking with him at 145. So with where we're currently at in the division. I have some things that I love and I hate about this. Starting with the positives, like you guys have said, great matchups on the board. Like you can kind of throw a dart at the 155-pound rankings, and it's a great fight for Ilia Topuria. Even if you're looking like, even if you go off the path of like the Islam or off the path of like the striking matchups anyone wants to see, like him versus Arman Sarukian, for example, great fight. Like fights like that, even if that's not like the number one fight on the board, like that's just, that you could do that and it'd be a great fight. Every fight there, it would be a great fight for Ilia. And specifically, I think, in my opinion, there shouldn't be a question about him getting the title fight. At 155 pounds, I think that's the best fight. Him and Islam, I think that's the best fight you can make in the UFC at the moment. So I'm pretty heavy on that being booked. Win or lose from there, like you can just line up the fights next. Like if he wins, maybe we do another one, or maybe he fights Charles. Once again, great fights. He loses. Now you're looking at your Gaethje, your Hooker, maybe Poirier. Who knows what's going on with him? But like Fiziev, like you can literally list off anybody, and there's Sarukian, great fight. So I think the future for him at 55 is going to be great. The only thing that I don't like is that he doesn't get the chance to do champ. It feels like you're going up with, taking a big risk. He doesn't really have the reward coming back, but at the same time, I do get the point of why he wasn't able to. I think he deserved it with what he did at 55 against Volkanovski and Holloway. It wasn't as long of a title reign. He didn't clean out the division, but I don't think there was any question that he's the best 145-pounder on the planet. And like you said, Jerry, he knocked out two of the best featherweights of all time in back-to-back fights. One of the two had never been knocked out before. But then that kind of opens the door to Islam, Belal, Duplessis. All these guys have talked about going up to do the double champ fight. And like, if you're Duplessis and you're sitting there, you got more than one title defense. What's stopping you from saying you deserve to go get the double champ fight? So I understand the hesitancy to kind of set that precedent with only one title defense, as much as I think in, isolation, he deserves it.
I do want to run it by, because I don't know if you guys saw the Diego Lopez's comments in the last few days about how apparently the UFC is now saying that if you want to move up as a champion for a double belt, you have to vacate it, so we won't get a champ fight. I don't know how true that is, because at the end of the day, this is a business, and champ fights sell extremely well. And if it's a guy who might just go up, like I'll use Israel Adesanya and going up to fight Jan Blachowicz, for example. We kind of knew he wasn't going to necessarily stay up there, but it was one that you can go up, fight for it, because you did clear out your division, and then just bounce back down. If you were to win, I think he would have bounced back down and kind of probably vacated the light heavyweight belt, more like vacate the middleweight belt. So there's stuff like that, and I'm just curious what you guys' thoughts are on that whole thing.
Well, first I'll say it is tough, because I feel like at featherweight, he did just beat like two of the best of all time, but I don't know their title defenses, off the top, but I would imagine Max, Volk, and Jose had a lot, both of them combined. So, leaving a division with only one title defense is going to be, in multiple ways more than one, tough to, if we're talking about it and speaking of who is truly the best of all time at that division. But then I didn't even think of that champ point that, he technically can't get it. Although I feel like it's, to some people, maybe not like the pure casuals, but I know some people though still like, well, he wasn't gonna lose that belt, so if he wins it in his next fight or his next two, I mean, you could grant him champ status. It just wouldn't be like official as much as that is an official stat. But I will say too, if that's what the UFC is gonna be doing, is gonna make people vacate and stuff. I I agree, like what you said, Jerry. The champ fights sell. It's an easy thing for people to gravitate towards, especially if they're not watching UFC consistently, but they're just their minds are going to go, oh, two belts must be very important. He must be really good. But the other thing is, I think now that the UFC fan base specifically is kind of over the obsession of the champ status, which started like 5 years ago or whatever, maybe even longer. But there was good and bad. Good because yes, those pay-per-views are going to sell, but bad though because it was hanging up divisions consistently across multiple divisions. So I think not everything can be great, but at least if you might be losing some of the luster on these champ fights, but at least you should be getting the positive bounce back from not holding up divisions, which kind of hurts divisions in the sports overall at times. It might take away the extremely huge pay-per-view boost on one specific card, but ideally it should be kind of better for the health of all divisions.
Yeah, I don't like the idea of leaving the champ stuff behind, but I do like the idea of making it hard. It shouldn't be easy to even be given that opportunity to begin with. It should be a very hard thing to earn. I think that, for example, I think Pantoja is getting close. I think he needs to beat Kai France first, but I think if he beats Kai France, we're going to be getting close to a point where maybe he needs one more, but it's going to be close is my point here, to the point where why doesn't he get to go do champ against Merab after, 4, 5, 6 title defenses? Like he'd be putting himself in a really good position. But I feel like there has to be kind of taken by a case-by-case situation where when you're looking at Topuria, like, I don't see any reason why in this scenario you couldn't have Topuria go up to fight, keep the belt, get him the Islam fight, and then there's no reason you can't say, like, hey, he's going to vacate. Like, he's never fighting at featherweight again, but he's not going to vacate that belt until after he fights. Like, I don't see why that was such a negative, but I feel like there has, as long as they're coming up with an agreement of how you're going to move forward in, those weight classes. And it also is really interesting as well that this comes also at a time where, I mean, a week ago, we're talking about Wei Li getting the double champ fights. And what's to say, now Wei Li can't, she has to vacate and move up to 125 permanently. Like, I don't know if I would agree with that. So I think I understand the sentiment where, like, once again, I'll use Duplessis, Belal, Islam as examples. Like, those are all guys that have talked about going up a division. And, if you're the UFC, the last thing you want is Belal Muhammad holding up 2 divisions, frankly. As much as people hate Belal, like, the UFC doesn't want that. I'm sure they wouldn't love the idea of Duplessis holding up middleweight with where it sits right now either. So I understand that perspective, but I just think, there's going to be cases where it's earned, and those should be rewarded.
And just going off like the kind of one of the last things you said about like these guys going up and holding up divisions, I think that it was smart for him to vacate this featherweight belt, and for them, because they have a few guys who are ready to go, ready to fight for the belt, deserving of it. Him moving up and vacating it allows us for something we'll get into shortly, I'm sure, about fights moving forward, and they have a plan moving forward. It's not like a division where you're like, and I think what I like about the Islam fight is lightweight's getting in its own way, these top contenders, especially with Armin, that whole situation. And you look at it, like the last true champ fight that I can remember us having, I could be completely wrong, but where it was a champ fighting champ was when Volkanovski went up on short notice to fight Islam. And that was because there was nobody else available. Everyone was either losing to each other or getting hurt after wins. So that makes sense. That's another time where Volkanovski had also wiped the floor with that whole division, or at least anybody who was on the up and cup, outside of Ilia Topuria in the end. But it's one of those things that I don't know if there's a right way to do it. I don't know if there's a wrong way to do it, but I think you need to earn it way more than some of these guys who are like, Islam's has one title defense against a true lightweight, and that was a guy who stepped in on a day's notice.
From ranked like 10 too, or maybe not that deep, but yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
And the last thing I want to say to pick up a few, like there's no right way to do it, wrong way to do it. And I think that stems from mismanagement over double champs and interim champions specifically, of how the UFC kind of picks and chooses when they do things. They'll set a precedent, then they'll just immediately backtrack it with something else. There's never been a clear path. So because like James, you said you would want Topuria to hold his champ status, meaning this Volk Lopes fight would be for interim champion, and then once Topuria were to give it up, would that interim champion be immediately promoted to champ? Because I think they've done that before, but they've also done it where nope, you still got to fight again to win, so it doesn't really technically count as a belt. So I just think that stems from the UFC just mishandling these situations consistently in the past. And then maybe not even mishandling. It's just the fact that they've never said a clear thing. It's like they always get to choose, what they want to do this time composed to last time. So,
yep, I would. That's what I would do. The way you just laid it out, where they would just fight for interim here, or honestly, like this fight could have waited, but like it's tough because, well, first of all, like if it's not Volk and Lopes, part of this, in my opinion, comes from desperation of if it's not Volk and Lopes in this main event, who is it? Like honestly, like are you putting? I don't think Belal and JDM. It sounds like they need that date. And then so if it's not Islam Topuria in this 314 card, like who are you gonna go to for your main event? Like, and that I feel like is part of the issue in this specific scenario. But yeah, I would just tag it interim, and and that's another thing is they can just be honest about it. Like you don't have to make this whole thing. Like they can just say like, hey, we're gonna call it interim for now, and the winner is gonna be elevated after Topuria fights in 2 months. And I don't see anything wrong with that. And to your point about interim stuff, like we're dealing with they completely put precedent to the side with the John Jones and Tom Aspinall stuff. Like we had an active interim champion not fighting the champion. Like it's insane. And he defended the interim championship. Like now we're just making shit up.
yeah.
But they'll promote that as double champ versus double champ, but not actual, or champ versus champ, but not actual champ versus champ fights. The one situation that I think would consistently work that the UFC did was when Volk went up to fight Islam the first time, they just booked Yair and Josh Emmett as the co-main event, interim title fight. Winner's going to fight Volk next. Like, I feel like they were very honest about that, and it made logical sense. That got a little that situation changed a lot when he steps in on short notice, and now he did defend it against Yair, so it's not like Yair just sit around and wait, but like that partially comes from Volkanovski being the fighter that Volkanovski is, where he was very active, and it worked for him because he was willing to fight 3 times that year. And then he turned around and fought too early after the Islam fight. So that a lot of that worked because of they were honest about it, and 2, Volkanovski was like, yeah, we're gonna do what we need to do, and he did it. So credit to him for making that situation work. So I think part of that should honestly play in as well. Is this fighter going to be a pain in the ass about this? Like, if you want to be a pain in the ass about how we're going to do this, sorry, you kind of lose the opportunity. But a guy like Volk who says, who sits down, figures it out, and runs with the plan, makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah, and I mean, just in the Volk situation, just the hypothetical wise, it's had he beat Islam, do you guys think he would have stayed up at 155 and defended? I think he would have gone right back down to 145 and continued defending down there personally. So
the plan was to go down to 45 and defend against Yair. And then once he beat Yair, he would have been able to bounce up, fight a lightweight, and then he would have had Topuria ready to go after that. And that would have worked because he was willing to fight 3 times that year.
Exactly. And that's the kind of guy that I don't necessarily see Topuria and Islam, a Belal. A DDP says he is that guy, but I don't see him being that guy. It's one of those things like you have to have a special breed of person who's willing to do that.
Yep. All right, let's keep talking about this Volk aspect of things because he's going to be one of the 2 beneficiaries of Ilia Topuria moving up. UFC 314 main event, we've already said it, but Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes, vacant featherweight title fight. It kind of felt like Volk was in line to get the title fight regardless. I feel that's the way it was trending. So maybe Lopes is the party who benefits a little bit more from the situation. But what do you guys feel about this being the matchup for the vacant belt now that it is vacant? Jerry, I believe it is your turn to lead us off on this one.
I mean, on one hand, you have Alexander Volkanovski, who has done virtually everything there is to do in this division. And then you have Diego Lopes, on the other hand, who lost his UFC debut on short notice and then has won 5 in a row, beating some of the better guys in this division. I think the biggest thing of why these two were named was that they needed something exciting. And I don't know if they were ready for a Movsar Evaloyev fight where there is a legitimate chance that he just lays on top of a guy and there's just no real action. It's just holding, trying to have ground control without going for submissions for 25 minutes. And I do think that's a big part of this because Volkanovski, we know how active he is. We know what he likes to do. We know his style. Diego Lopes has somewhat of a similar style, in my opinion, where he likes to go forward. He likes to make contact and likes to kind of create chaos. At times, he also can use the ground game and can grapple and can try and get to submissions. Does have 12 submissions, 10 knockouts. So that's, I mean, he only has gone to decision 8 times in his whole career. This is a guy who's entertaining to watch. Volkanovski is a fan favorite. A lot of people kind of want to see him, not going to say everyone, a lot of people want to see him kind of get back to a title fight, see if he can put all those 3 knockouts behind him and get going. So I like this fight. I think it's probably the best one you could have had. And if it wasn't Volk, I guess it's Movsar Evaloyev as the other option. And that would be interesting to see the rematch, but I think this is just much more of, and to the point you made earlier, James, you needed a main event. You needed one that's going to get clicks, get buys, and this is the one to do that for 314 when there's a whole lot of other guys who, if you want a title fight, you're going to have to dig hard and deep to find someone and convince someone to do it.
Also, I think the funny thing is, like, I would assume besides the way how this fight might play out, Evaloyev will get the next one. So it's still like you're still kind of getting 2 fights out of it. But no, I agree. I mean, if Topuria's gone, I think, we've said before, I think he's the most exciting fighter. We're one of right now. Obviously, there's always Pereira still. But now to keep the division going without him, yeah, I think there's a lot of things to see how good Lopes really is because he has a few names on his thing, but still relatively. I mean, you compare resume to resume, Volk's going to beat anybody or Holloway's going to beat anybody. So it'd be hard for any newer guy to have that resume. But like you said, extremely exciting still, Lopes. And there's a huge amount of talent there too. So it's where I think a lot of people, like, I don't know if the odds have dropped already, but I'm sure there'd be people picking Lopes a lot in this fight too. And then this is that chance for Volk to, like you said, get past the knockouts. Finally, he took some time off, see if he can really, which show his greatness in another aspect. Like maybe he is over that cliff a little bit, but maybe he's not at the bottom now. He's still, he's still got a couple fights left in him, and he can get a great bounce back win here, get the belt back. Which I'm not the hugest. I prefer defenses over like constantly like losing and then getting the belt back, but in this situation, I think getting the belt back still would mean a huge thing for his legacy.
Yeah, and I do want to just put it out there. I just looked up the odds on at least one website. It's Volk's a minus 155 favorite, Diego Lopes plus 130. I'm not sure when this opened up, whether it was a couple days ago when the news broke or whether it's just today and it came out. But either way, that's where it looks at as of this very second on February 21st.
Yeah, I believe it opened at Volkanovski minus 120. Was the open number because I was very interested in this because I have a strong take on how this fight plays out. But money came in on the Volkanovski side to move it. I believe it got to 170, and then there was some buyback on Lopes as the underdog. So it kind of got to 170. At least 170 is what I saw it peak at for the Volkanovski. So that's kind of been the betting trend since this has dropped, I believe, 2 days ago, 2 nights ago, 48 hours or so. But so just to start off at the top of this, I do think Evloev was probably more deserving than Lopes, with all fairness. I mean, he's got the win over Lopes. I kind of hold the Aljamain Sterling win a little bit higher regard than the Ortega win, but like I don't really care. Like I'm honestly not that mad that we're gonna screw over Evloev. Like I could really, I'll be honest, I'm not crying as I go to bed because most of our Evloev isn't getting this title shot. So
9 wins, 9 decisions in the UFC. Diego Lopes has at least gone out and tried to finish people, which is my thing.
yeah,
And he ducked Lopes too. And then when Lopes was starting to get more fans, all of a sudden won the fight again, which was one thing I didn't like about it.
Yeah.
Which compelling there. If Lopes is the one who wins this fight, I think that rematch for the belt is a sneaky. You kind of have to find a way to get that story to the casual fan. But for like people who know the story, I think there'd be a level of interest there. And because those two do have a nice little rivalry there, brewing.
I think it'd be hilarious if, say, Lopes wins the belt. He's like, no. He avoided fighting me when I was coming up, and I was trying to get him, and it was like, oh, suddenly he wanted to fight me again, and now I have the belt. Nah, we're gonna just skip him. I don't think you can do that because it's Evloev, as you said, James is really deserving as well. Maybe we have a 3-way fight.
Yeah, and we got Pitbull and Yair to talk about too, and I'm interested to see. We'll talk about that in a minute, but maybe Pitbull gets himself in the title picture with a win. But my favorite thing about this fight is we've talked about Volk coming back from those knockout losses. I am really interested to see how he does against the power of Lopes. Lopes is just simply massive, and like I'm interested to see if Lopes can put a shot on him, and does Volkanovski drop like a sack of potatoes. I'm interested to see how that chin looks. I think that's going to be the most compelling thing of the fight for me, because if his chin is not just completely cooked and it's just a factor of getting head kicked and getting hit with a clean hook from Ilia Topuria, and that's why he was knocked out, but he still has the chin. I think he would win this fight, but I also think he could rack up a few more defenses. Based on the way the division currently looks. If we find out he has a chin, now we're running him out there against Movsar Evloev, which I think he can win that fight as well. It's a different challenge because you have to deal with more. Evloev's got good cardio, so it's not like he's going to gas. He's going to wrestle for 25 minutes. But I do think that's a winnable fight. I don't know if I'd pick him. That's a whole nother discussion. But I think it'd be very interesting to see how he looks here, and if he can get a defense or two. Not saying we need 8 out of them, but a couple defenses here I think would be very impressive for his legacy, because maybe he's not completely washed, but I think we can all agree he's not at his peak #1 pound for pound fighter in the world like he was a few years ago. So getting title wins at that portion of your career says a lot about how high you were at your peak. So I'm very interested in this fight for that reason alone. We're gonna skip over the co-main next. That's an audible by me because I want to keep it in the featherweight division, and then we'll circle back to the lightweight fight. The UFC signed former Bellator double champion Patricio Pitbull. Pitbull win over Michael Chandler to win the lightweight belt and become double champ, and he had a lot of featherweight title defenses across 2 reigns. So I think he defended it 5 times, lost to AJ McKee, then came back, defended it again. He's got some pretty good wins as far as outside the UFC competition goes. If you compare his resume to someone like Michael Venom Page, for example, he's got a better just streak of wins over names. Also dropped down to 135 and tried to get a belt there and become a 3 division champion. That wouldn't have been simultaneous, but would have been a feat nonetheless. He ended up losing to Sergio Pettis. So Patricio Pitbull, probably one of the best fighters over the last decade to not fight in the UFC. He's coming in now at 37 years old. So I think it's a few years past, but I still think there's some potential here, some meat on the bone here. What do you guys make of UFC signing Patricio Pitbull and throwing him in there with Yair Rodriguez to start off his UFC career? Anthony, you can lead us off on this one.
I mean, I like it. I think once again, anytime you can add a name or with some talent, obviously, but add a name that can immediately kind of get into the mix a little bit, that's always a win. We're always here for more fun fights, entertaining fights, and that's a fight. you would never get to see, whether that be him fighting 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's just obviously he was in a different promotion. But I mean, that is like the new UFC bread and butter. Just getting them when they're old, though, and all the way out. Still should be entertaining. But like MVP, even Ben Askren was a little older and stuff. But I mean, if anything, though, even I guess Michael Chandler too was still on the little older side compared to his prime of when he was with the other promotion. But I think it's fun. And then immediately too, Jair's a super fun fighter. Definitely has his flaws and stuff, has his weaknesses, but for the most part, when he's able to, he can put on a fun show. So I think that's a good little first fight for Patricio, and then another good name for Yair. Because even though it's tough because he's not Volk or Holloway, but Yair is someone who's also fought a lot of people in that division too. So he was going to have to start doing rematches against people and stuff. So this is overall, I think it's a good matchup.
Yeah, I like the fresh face aspect for this division, even if he is older than everybody else, I think, in this entire division. Because Volk's 36 as far as rankings wise goes. There's no other guys that old at top of towards the top half of this featherweight division. So that's going to be an interesting part. But it seems like he can do it every which way. 12 knockouts, 12 submissions, 12 decisions. Patricio Pitbull finds ways to win. As you said, he's 9 defenses across 3 title reigns in the featherweight division. Might have been 2. I know he fought for the lightweight belt as well early on. Yeah, so he's fought in all these divisions, and I think that's what's something interesting is, hey, maybe he does come into the UFC in the featherweight division. Maybe he does beat Yair Rodriguez. Then we know, because what's also telling about Yair, he's lost 2 in a row. He got knocked out by Volkanovski in a title fight. Then he comes back in a rematch against Brian Ortega and gets submitted there. If he now comes and fights this guy who's brand new to the UFC and he gets beat badly, gets finished, then you're like, okay, maybe Patricio Pitbull is for real in this as far as in UFC goes. And also, maybe it's time to start looking at Yair Rodriguez and see, like, okay, what do we do with him next? What's down the line? Because if he's not going to beat these guys and fight for a belt again, is he going to move up? Is he going to move down? And maybe Pitbull in the same way is maybe he comes in, doesn't feel the cut because he did just try and go up to, or did just try and go down. So I don't know how that's going to affect him. It wasn't that long ago, but it's one of those ones that, like, there's just so many questions I have in the back of my mind about how Patricio Pitbull will look in the UFC because he's fighting much better opponents. Nothing against like the AJ McKees, Sergio Pettis's, the Michael Chandler at the time, but this is the big show, and there's a reason Bellator's Bellator folded, didn't it?
PFL bought it. And
yeah.
Lord knows what they're doing over there. I'd love to tell you. I try and figure it out, and I can't.
Oh yeah,
that's folding.
Yeah,
yeah, it's a good way to put it.
It seems like it's just every time I see Bellator fighters or former Bellator fighters, they're just complaining about the PFL some way or another. So I think this is going to be a trend we see more of these big name guys. Like, you're not going to let us fight UFC. Can we get a deal going? And I think this will be a fun one that tells a lot about both of their stature in the division.
Yeah, the UFC is going to sign more guys. When they asked Dana about Pitbull a while back, when this whole, we got X amount of guys out of contract type deal with Bellator looking like it was going to fold. I know people talked about Hughes and Nurmagomedov being the last Bellator fight, and what are we going to do? Yada, yada, yada. It's a whole wormhole. But point being, Dana was like less thrilled about Pitbull than someone like Aaron Pico, for example. Like when Aaron Pico was brought up, he was like, yes, we want Aaron Pico. Yeah, basically. Pico's currently dealing with the contract stuff to get out of that. So like they can't just like, oh, we signed Aaron Pico. Like there's contractual things there. Didn't have that concern with Pitbull. So if they signed Pitbull, like he's not going to be the last one. It is kind of the thing that I hate about this is that I listen to Pitbull talk about like, oh, I'll go to the UFC and beat Volk and Max Holloway. And it's like, well, now him and Volk are both old and Max Holloway's in a different division when like we could have just, he would have got smoked by Max 2 years ago when we was talking the trash 3 years ago. But that's a whole nother discussion. What I do like about this is we're signing a guy to add to this featherweight division. And at the same time, we just had Max and Ilia both leave the division. In my opinion, featherweight was the best division in the UFC, but you just had Max and Ilia move up to lightweight to join that division. So now it's like, all right, well, now it's lightweight. Like, just kind of the nature of when you have two of your top, in my opinion, right now, there would be the top two featherweights. They both moved up to 155, and I like seeing another guy at 145 just to add more talent. Not to say the division doesn't have great prospects. It's got 100 great prospects and a bunch of great unranked fighters, but like I like the idea of adding a little bit of fresh blood considering you just lost two guys. And for Yair, like if we're trying to see what Pitbull's got, it's a good test because we've seen championship fighters can beat Yair. So if he wants to be a championship fighter, you have to beat Yair respectfully, of course, to Yair because he is talented. But at the same time, Yair is going to bring the fans in because people love watching Yair. So it's a good opportunity for Pitbull in that regard to prove you can beat a guy that you have to beat to fight for a UFC title, and you're also going to have fans watching. It's not like this is a Muslim Evloev where no one really cares when he fights. People care when Yair Rodriguez fights, so it is an opportunity in that regard as well.
And I think in a similar way, you both mentioned Michael Venom Page already. They correct me if I'm wrong, but his UFC debut was Kevin Holland, wasn't it?
Yep.
Works out perfectly. You get the views, you get people interested because people love Kevin Holland, even if they don't necessarily know who Michael Venom Page is coming over from another promotion. Same thing with this. People like Yair. If they don't know Patricio, they will find out about Patricio. And I also want to just say one other thing I like about this signing, just in general. I did go and look at some of the ages. Ortega's 34. So I don't know how long he has left. He did look good in his last couple fights, I believe, because he beat, or I guess
he got washed up pretty bad in the Lopes fight, but prior to that, he was winning.
Yeah. And then Josh Emmett, I hadn't even realized was 39 years old. So I don't know how much longer he has left.
Well, we got Lerone Murphy. If Lerone Murphy can take out Josh Emmett, then that gives you another guy up there at the top.
Exactly, I guess. And then still waiting for Arnold Allen. So it just is another guy to throw into this mix chaos because Calvin Cater's on the decline majorly, and he was one guy who's always kind of towards the top. So I like seeing a fresh face in there with a talented one, even if he is on the little older side.
They'll still have a couple of years to squeeze out the last couple fights out of him too. So the UFC is gonna make it work somehow.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. It also means since he is getting up there, he wants to fight often and fight tough guys. So
yeah,
that just gives us more good fights every year.
I'm sure the UFC wouldn't mind seeing a washed up Patricio Pitbull, one of the best Bellator fighters of all time, just get knocked out like 3 times in a row by like Gene Silva. Yeah. We'll knock him out in like a year or 2 years when he's washed up, and the UFC will love it.
I'm sure they'll share those highlights right after the fight happens. They won't gatekeep it.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's go back up on the card placement to the co-main event. 5 rounds in the co-main event between Paddy Pimblett and Michael Chandler. This is a wild one. It's a wild one. Anthony, I'll swing it right over to you. What do you make of this matchup?
I mean, I like it. I think I was trying to make sure whose Paddy's last fight was. It was the Bobby Green one. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's about time. I know Paddy lost some of his the original hype train he came in on, but this is, I think, without a doubt, a big step up. Depending on how even you feel about Michael Chandler, I still think it would be fair to say it's a big step up, though. And I think it's a good fight, as in Michael Chandler is a great talent for losing fights, but making them having 1 or 2 moments that keeps everyone still a fan of his, and they'd be like, oh, but he jumped on his back 3 times with Charles Oliveira. It's like he almost won it. But I think this is a good test to see if Michael Chandler even still has, because I wouldn't put him as a straight Kevin Holland as how you can plug him in for a semi-entertaining fight. This would be a good test to see if he can still even compete at a high level at all. And then for Paddy, I think this would be obviously the biggest name on his record until then. And then another name to that still has a good amount of hype and fans around him. A lot of people still love Michael Chandler. So this would be another boost for Paddy to try to get some of that original aura back from his first hype train when he was on his first little run. So I think, and then the 5 rounds actually kind of intrigues me too a little bit. So, and then besides all the outside factors, this is a fight that I just actually genuinely would be kind of excited for to see how it plays out.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think the intrigue and excitement factor of both these guys, whether it's in the actual octagon or if it's at the press conference, we know both of them love to talk the talk. Sometimes, more often than not, they don't necessarily completely back it up. But I think this is one of those fights in this. You look at this lightweight division, it makes sense. You have all these guys at the top. You now get Ilia Topuria up there. So, I mean, we don't have a Poirier fight yet. We don't really have anything for Oliveira, Sarukian, but we have a feeling that those two combined with Islam, maybe a Max Holloway, all these fights are going to get booked one way or another. Why not have Michael Chandler just fight a guy who there is a real world that Michael Chandler comes out, rocks him, knocks him, and gets back on his somewhat hype train. And as far as Paddy goes, like, sure, we could have him fight Renato Moicano, but as we've talked before, do we really want the two prospects in this division? Because again, this division's kind of aging a bit as well. Do we want two up and coming prospects to kind of get rid of each other this early? Instead, you could have, say, Paddy does come out and beat Michael Chandler. All right, Michael Chandler, tough luck. It's time to kind of maybe move into that gatekeeper to the top 7, 8, 9 rating spot. So I think it'll be fun. I do think it'll just be a chaotic fight for 5 rounds. So anytime Michael Chandler's in there, I think it's fun to watch.
Yeah, and on the Chandler side, he's at a point in his career where he's just lost so many fights, you have to take a step down in the rankings.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the fact of what it is. And, like, the alternate options are all guys, like, what are we going to do? Book him against Poirier, Gaethje, and Hooker again? He already fought all those guys as much as those were good fights. Oliveira would be a third time. Like, he's fought a lot of these guys, and you assume that a guy like a Saruki and you want a little bit higher up. There was talk at one point about Max Holloway for the BMF, but, like, is that really the one you want to do with Max Holloway for his debut, considering he's Chandler's losing fights, when you could give him a Poirier, for example, who has been closer to the top more recently? And if you're Chandler and you're looking for a prospect, like, would you rather fight Rafael Fiziev or would you rather fight Paddy Pimblett?
Yeah.
Would you rather fight Joel Alvarez or would you rather fight Paddy Pimblett? Like, I feel like a lot of answers to those questions the answer ends up being Paddy Pimblett.
Yeah.
And for the UFC, you put yourself in a situation where I don't think they care who wins. Like, maybe you'd say they'd rather have Paddy win because you can maybe build him to a fight against Ilia and they have beef and that could be a big one. And he's younger so that you could get more fights out of him. But, like, if Michael Chandler wins, like, they will run Michael Chandler. Like, Michael Chandler getting a win would run him right back up to the names we just talked about. Similar to Poirier when he beat Benoit Saint-Denis. Maybe it doesn't mean Chandler's getting a title fight, but a top fight. And it's a massive test for Paddy, considering it's 5 rounds. Like, oh my God, he looks terrible every time a fight gets to the 3rd round. And his last fights have been the corpse of Tony Ferguson. I wouldn't go as far to say the corpse of Bobby Green, but like Bobby Green post Jalen Turner, awful knockout and awful stoppage, like bad, like not good, not durable. And then there's like the loss to Jared Gordon that was called a win. And it's just like, now we're putting him in there with Michael Chandler. And to be honest, I may have an unreasonable amount of money on Michael Chandler to win. Because, like, Paddy Pimblett is there to be hit all night long, and you're fighting Michael Chandler. Like, I feel like he's going to put an overhand right on him. And we managed to find a fight where Michael Chandler's got a cardio advantage. And that's an insane thing to say. Every fight, it's, well, is Chandler going to gas out and get finished, you know? Like, that time he fights Chandler or Gaethje or Poirier, you know the other guy's got better cardio. In this fight, like, I'd probably assume Paddy gasses out first. Maybe Paddy grapples him in the first round, but, like, I don't think it's a walk in the park grappling Michael Chandler, even if he's not, you know, elite A1 grappler as he used to be. So I think it's a great fight, and I think it's a pretty good fight for Chandler, just without watching any tape, just initial first reaction. And he's also a betting underdog. -130 Pimblett, plus 110 Chandler. So lots of interesting things, in my opinion, going on here.
That's why, I mean, I haven't really been trying to go too in depth because it's going to happen in April. So we'll have time to talk about it. But that's the one thing I would like to see, because I do want to see, if Michael Chandler still has the power with his overhands. I know Scousers are supposed to get knocked out. So that was kind of intriguing to me just to see if that ever happens or if that will happen. But then I was also curious to see if Paddy can really see how effectively he could grapple and maybe find that submission. And then kind of to your point earlier, the last thing I wanted to say was I do think this is the perfect fight because I think this is the last fight you could get from Chandler to overhype and sell if he were to lose. Because then after that, I think people ideally should be done with it. But just like you said, because I was already thinking, all it takes is if Chandler just gets one win, the UFC just bought him for 2 or 3 more fights now that they can try to sell still to people. And just because they're always going to put that Tony Ferguson highlight up. They're going to be like, oh, he's been known for some wars and stuff. So if he just gets one more win, and especially like a KO finish knockout win, then they'll be set for at least 2 more fights to sell him with.
And especially after the whole thing we all know that happened with Conor McGregor, where he pretty much took 2 years off waiting for that. This is a very, very winnable fight. The Charles Oliveira fight was not, in my opinion, not a very winnable one, and clearly he didn't end up winning it. So, but it was one that I didn't even think he really had a chance in hell at of getting the rematch win over Oliveira. And now this is one where, James, you already said it. Anthony, you've talked about it. Like, there's a real possibility that Chandler comes out and baptizes Paddy the way he fights. So it could be something big to rejuvenate his UFC excitement and career even.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good matchmaking here. I'll lead the charge on this next one because nothing I love more than some Carlos Prates violence, and they book him against Geoff Neal. I won't go as depth on this one as I did in the last one, but I think it's a good step for Carlos Prates going from Neal Magny to Geoff Neal. I think it's a good step from, a ranking perspective. And it's also like Geoff Neal fights are consistently good, and Carlos Prates is killing people right now. So I think it's a smart and fun matchmaking. And like you're chucking this in like a pay-per-view main card, and it's like towards the start. It's not like your co-main or your middle fight. It's going to be either the opener or the second fight. Like it's going to end up being a great pay-per-view. And I think it is it's the opener to the pay-per-view. Like that's insane. So I think it's high quality, and I think it's going to end up being good fight and good step up for Prates. And always credit to Geoff Neal because you just look at the guys he's been fighting. He's not saying no. I'll tell you that much.
That's what I thought. I didn't see this at first until kind of we were looking before the show, but what an absolute banger. I love this fight because I'm a huge Geoff Neal fan, as in in a perfect world, maybe he could be champion, but I think he consistently puts out good fights, and his last 2 losses are from Shavkat and Ian Gary, who I believe to be maybe 2 of the best 3 fighters in that division. 4, we'll see how Jack Della looks in the next fight, but at least 2 of the top 3 right now. And so, I think this is, and like you said, Prates has been killing people, so this is a huge test that I think will get answers, and it'll be a great win for Geoff Neal if he can win, and then obviously an amazing, huge step up in competition, and then getting your hand raised for Prates. So I love it. I think these are one of the fights where it's not a title fight or anything, but UFC, it shouldn't be this hard. Sometimes like you can make amazing fights like this.
Yeah, this is a layup of a match making. And especially because I believe that this fight was just announced recently as well, wasn't it? Or earlier this week?
It was on the same day as the main event, but it got leaked before the announcement, so it was on Wednesday.
Because it was meant to be Gilbert Burns and Michael Morales, which is in a way similar thing. Michael Morales is young and upcoming guy who's just beating everybody, and Gilbert Burns is kind of receding. So I think it fits perfectly into this. And you look at Carlos Prates, won all of his 4 UFC fights by knockout. I think the last time he didn't win a fight by knockout just across all promotions was 2019. So this man comes to finish people. And we talked about him. We saw what he did to the Leech, Li Jingliang. We saw what he did to Neal Magny. We saw what he did with his knees against Charles Radke. If it's time for Geoff Neal to move on, this is kind of throwing him to the literal wolves, even more so than it already was to Ian Gary and Shavkat. in Geoff Neal's defense, he did manage to win. I know his RDA had a knee injury, but this is one that could just, it's a name, it's on the resume. You see the guys who he's beaten in the past and fought in the past for Geoff Neal. This is just a big name for the up and comer Prates.
Yep. We'll stay in the welterweight division. Or one note first. You mentioned Morales and Gilbert Burns. That fight moved to 315. We don't have to talk about that one because I believe we talked about that when it was booked the first time around for 314, but that was just punted a month down the road. Still a good fight, just going at 315 instead of 314. So
I just want to ask real quick: is Morales a fighting nerd too, or
Mm-mm.
no? Okay, just making sure.
No. All right. So UFC 315 main event. Shavkat Rakhmonov was not able to make the walk. That's the big piece of this. We have Belal Muhammad versus Jack Della Maddalena. The instant reaction for everybody was, why the hell isn't it Shavkat Rakhmonov? Shavkat's hurt. So we went from Belal pulling out with an injury to now Shavkat now can't make the walk because of injury. They go to Jack Della Maddalena. Jerry, I believe it is your turn to lead us off. What do you make of Jack Della Maddalena being the man they call in absence of Shavkat Rakhmonov?
I mean, I'm not opposed to this. My biggest question when it first saw that it was Jack was not even the Shavkat aspect. I was like, huh, so who's Leon Edwards fighting now? And then I saw the Sean Brady news that came with that. I don't know if we'll have time to dive into that, but that's the new main event for the UFC England card. I'm a big fan of Leon Edwards, so that's kind of one that, even if his fights recently have been rough, but this is one like, I think Jack Della Maddalena deserves it. He deserves a title shot. If it's not, I don't think it should be a Kamaru Usman. I am curious though, because I think he needed maybe that stepping stone to get him one more fight before the belt. Sometimes things don't work out the way. Sometimes luck falls into your hands, and here we go. I like this fight. I'm curious to see what happens. Belal seems very confident per usual. So I have no complaints about it. I was more just like, I guess it makes sense, but it seems like I wanted to see something else. I wanted to see that Leon fight and then him go from there.
I 100% agree with that. That's kind of in the same boat that I was, but I didn't know at first what happened because I was on vacation, so I didn't have much service. I just saw the thing got changed or whatever. But now that I know it was injury, that does I think they made the best pivot they could. Obviously, Leon kind of got screwed out of that because that fight was supposed to be in the UK, right? And that's why. So I assume Sean Brady will then. Leon's not moving. He's still fighting in the UK. The opponent's just not Sean Brady. So yeah, I think they made the two, pretty clean, pretty good pivots as much as they could. And besides Shavkat and I guess Ian Gary technically, but he lost that one. Jack Della was the next one in line. So I think it's all working out. Maybe not the preferred way it was laid out or the preferred opponents, but they did all the right things to where those are still both should be two good fights. And it's not like either of them are undeserving. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, you could have approached this like from the start and got this answer. I think it would have been incorrect, but like this plan makes sense and it's a very respectable plan B. As far as the title fight goes, like you determined that Jack Della Maddalena was good enough to fight number one ranked Leon Edwards, former champion, in a title eliminator. You're just going up one spot, really. As much as that gold belt means a lot, you're really just going up one spot in the rankings. Obviously, gold belt means a lot. There's added pressure. There's a lot there. But as far as the talent of the fighters you're fighting, like it should be it's an understandable jump. You're taking a guy you thought could fight for a title. That's why you put him in a title eliminator. So makes sense in that regard. And I agree. I'm happy we're not going an Usman route. With all due respect to Usman, didn't need to see the Leon rematch. I like Leon a lot as well, but he's got to get a win first. And for Leon, I'm happy that he got a Sean Brady. It's a very, very tough fight. That Sean Brady fight. It's not a walk in the park by any means. He's been fighting grapplers and now he gets to fight Jack Jiu-Jitsu guy. He's kind of taking out every single archetype of grappler you can at this point and still hasn't fought a striker in a couple of years. I was really looking forward to that Jack Della Maddalena fight. I think it would have been a really interesting striking clash. Now he's got to go out there and anti-grapple again. It's a big switch up for him. But I feel like that's a better outcome than, for example, giving you like a Michael Morales, who is a really good striker, but is not as highly ranked, and there's a little bit more risk there. I think Sean Brady, you're going to get a little bit bigger tip of the cap for taking on a Sean Brady under the circumstances. At least he should. So I think both the moves make sense, even if like I'm not thrilled about it. Like I'm not pumped, but understanding the situation, I respect it.
I will say the one I was kind of surprised that I didn't see any talk of, not even getting the title shot, but maybe getting the Leon fight, just for that whole striker thing, was Joaquin Buckley.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like him just being on his winning streak that he has been and what he's done recently maybe deserved it. But the Sean Brady fight, I think it's a win-win in a way for Leon. Like if he goes out, obviously if he goes out and wins, maybe he gets the next title shot. Depends on what's up with Shavkat and who wins the belt or who wins this Jack Della Maddalena fight as well. But if he loses, it lines him up for, like, in my opinion, one of the more entertaining fights that I've been saying I've wanted. It sounds like they wouldn't do it in England, but just give me Ian Gary and Leon Edwards, Ireland versus England, pure hatred between the two countries at times when it comes to sports. So I just think that's one of the fights I want to see in this division, even if it comes at the cost of him losing. Meanwhile, if Sean Brady comes out and wins, we immediately have another contender in this division.
Yep. This division is also in a pretty good spot when you're able to mention, you have to scramble, and you're able to mention guys like Ian Gary, guys like Kamaru Usman, guys like Buckley, who didn't get any of the big fights. You still have those guys to book the next fights for. So this division's in a pretty good spot based on the circumstances.
Yeah. In the past, you wouldn't have been able to make 2 pivots, and then we could still name like 3 other fighters or 4 other fighters that we'd still want to see.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good time in the welterweight division.
Yeah. All right, the co-main event for UFC 315, Valentina Shevchenko, Manon Fiorot for the women's strawweight title. Anthony, it's your turn to lead us off. What do you make of this being the decision for the women's flyweight title and Valentina Shevchenko's first defense of this title reign she's on?
I mean, it makes sense, right? I don't know where else they would have went necessarily. I'd have to look. I guess Blanchfield, her last one, she beat, and Barber did win too. But I think, did they just go down, pick the number 2 fighter? Grasso's finally done. And has Fiorot fought for the belt?
No.
No, right? Because they've been doing the Grasso-Shevchenko trilogy. So I think it makes sense. And then, as much as I might have issues with how much people hype up Shevchenko and stuff like that, it will be nice just to see her fight someone else, kind of, and just even for a belt, two people fighting. So I think it's a good logical title fight, and then obviously, thankfully, it's a co-main as well, so they're not selling a whole pay-per-view off of it. So I think it's about as good as they could do for the women's MMA title fights.
I think as far as where this fight is and who is fighting, this is a sneaky underrated fight. Manon Fiorot, French fighter, we all know that. But this fight is in Montreal, Canada, in Quebec, which is the French part of Canada. This is almost going to be like a home fight, I would believe, for her. Sure, Shevchenko has a bunch of fans. But I think the other talks that I think we talked about it a couple weeks ago after Zhang Weili won her fight. You could make that fight. You could go for the super fight. But like Fiorot's worked her butt off. If she gets all the way up here and she's 35 years old, I don't know how much time she really has left in her career. This is one like she's deserved and earned, and she's been sitting behind waiting for this Alexa Grasso stuff to finally finish. Now she gets her chance. I'm excited for that. I do think it's curious that Alexa Grasso and Natalia Silva are also scheduled to fight on this card. So that kind of just sets this division up for a whole load of things.
Yeah. So for me, I think this makes a lot of sense, and I wasn't really against a Manon Fiorot or Weili title fight here. I think Weili deserves to move up to 125 and for the belt. But one of the things I said when we first talked about it was like I'd kind of have sore taste in my mouth if Manon sat out waiting for a title fight while they did this Grasso trilogy just to not get it. Like that would have really sucked, and she earned it. She'd be Erin Blanchfield, in my opinion. At the time, I said those were the 2 best girls in the weight class, regardless of who was fighting for the title. So Manon Fiorot deserves it. And I'm very happy with the way this works out from a timetable perspective, because we talked several times in the episode about the UFC fumbling things. This feels like a good way to squeeze the Manon Fiorot title defense in, and then you get Weili fighting the winner without having to sideline Weili for a year. If this fight would have happened in, August, it'd be a much different discussion, but we're getting it in the first initial portion of the year, and then that leaves you a Weili double champ fight for this division later in the year. And if that doesn't come together, you have Natalia Silva versus Grasso, which could potentially give you another title challenger if Natalia Silva wins. So I think they've played their cards right in this division. And also, you don't have to bank on Silva beating Grasso to have a title contender, since you've got Weili there as well. So I think this has worked out pretty well. And I often complain about the way we're planning things and scheduling things and stuff like that, but I think this division has worked out pretty well the way the pieces have come together.
Yeah, I also find it curious, like just looking at the ESPN app at the odds, Fior's a favorite, -120 to Shevchenko's +100, so very close. But
I think she should be about -350, to be honest, but that's just my opinion.
I think Fior wins pretty comfortably. But
Yeah.
I already bet Manon Fiorot.
Really? I think Shevchenko's just been kind of showing her age in her last ones and stuff. And then, like I said, I don't know, anytime you fight someone 3 times and like none of them are ever like, I don't know, I guess a while ago though, maybe that first and second one and stuff, there was she was winning the fight, tries to do this spinning, heel kick or back kick or something, and then gets scrapped up. So I don't know, it wasn't super domination. There was a lot more damage could have been done in that last fight too. So I think yeah, Shevchenko, as much as she's like one of the goats of women's MMA, she's just getting old and people are maybe losing the hype or in the faith in her.
Yeah. One last point on that. The fight before that, the whole trilogy started, she lost to Talia Santos and they gave her the decision win. So there's that as well. And then she goes out there across the 3 fights, you watch her speed decrease, which is like a massive role in her game. In this whole time, she's fighting a girl who cannot grapple at all. After she just got out grappled by Santos, she's fighting a girl who cannot grapple at all. She wins one because the girl cannot grapple at all, but she got submitted in one of them, and the girl can't grapple at all, and she managed to get submitted once. So, very interesting stuff, that trilogy. If you just kind of put some pieces together and think about it, and
I actually had already forgot about that Santos fight too, which is crazy because I do remember. I thought Santos won that. So.
Yeah, me too.
I will say underrated. Just like looking at the other fights on this that not necessarily fully committed to, but they've talked about. Benoit Saint Denis and Joel Alvarez.
Banger. That's a banger.
Banger of a fight.
I did see that update. I was super excited for that one.
That looked like a sick fight.
That card may end up being decent, which for Canada card is like, usually they just send Canada the slops, but they're off to not a bad start at all.
Whoa. We usually send Canada Sean Strickland.
Yeah.
Yeah, the slops. I didn't stutter it out. All right, let's switch it over to UFC Seattle real quick. We don't have to go in depth on any of these fights, but I do want to give you guys a minute to any fight at main event. Obviously, it's the big one. Co-main's a big one, but I just kind of want to give you guys the floor to say anything that is on your chest regarding these fights while we're here. Anthony, I think it's your turn to lead us off. So, regardless of what the fight is, you don't even have to talk about the ranked fights. Talk about whatever fight you want, anything that stands out to you on the card.
Well, I just wanted to say, I guess, to start off with the main event, I always be excited for it because Cejudo is so decorated in his some think he is the most decorated not MMA fighter of all time, or maybe fighter
combat
of all time.
Sports athlete.
Combat sports athlete, perfect. So whenever and I know he's getting older too and stuff, and give or take, he is at a lighter division, but anytime he's in the octagon, especially when it could be nearing his twilight, I'll always be down for that. And I still think he's incredibly talented and can still win fights. On the inverse of that, I love Song Yadong too. So, and it's funny because he's one of the younger guys compared to some of those old people. So, and he's had some good wars too. I know there was did the Jan one get canceled? But I remember the Sandhagen one, which I thought was a big step for him.
He fought Jan. He won. It was 29-28 Jan. He won in typical Piotr Jan fashion. He drops the first round and then looks great in 2 and 3.
Yeah. So I think Yadong's one of the names, even though he's been younger. His resume is pretty built up already. Just not as much wins as you would like to see from a prospect, but I think there's another great opportunity. He's fighting another legend or another. Maybe not all of his other fights were against legends, but he's fighting another incredible talent, highly ranked. So he has another chance to get a win and kind of really start pushing himself into maybe title contention once again. He always seems to slip up in those fights leading into it. And then the last one, the other quick one I'll go is Fluffy Hernandez. We've been waiting. We've talked about him on like, I don't know, 10 podcasts now since before he's fought again. So now he's finally his fight time. So I'm very excited to see what he can do if he can keep up the hot streak he's on. He just looked incredibly dominant in his last one, and he's fighting Brendan Allen. So some good and bad with Brendan Allen. Definitely has some skill, can definitely win some fights. I wouldn't say title contender, but I think this is a good spot for Hernandez to move up in the rankings again, because as good as I think we think he is still pretty deep in those rankings, but he also hasn't fought in a while. So
Yeah. I mean, I could go on about those top two, but I think he did a good job there. And there's two other guys that I'm really excited to see. Jean Silva out here knocking out everybody he faces, it seems. He'll get the doctor stoppage of Drew Dober in his last time out. But that wasn't like, oh, Drew Dober twisted something. He got his face smashed in by Jean Silva in that fight. It's 3-0 in the UFC, 3 knockouts or TKOs. Looking forward to that fight with Melsik Bagdasaryan. Sure. Close enough from Armenia. Big favorite. I would assume he does something similar to what we've seen him do so far, because this is a young guy who's on his way up the rankings or moving up the division. He's 28 years old. Another 28-year-old, 14 wins, 1 loss, 14 wins by knockout. And he did redeem his 1 loss to the Pleasure Boy or the Pleasure Man. He lost to the Pleasure Man by submission, then promptly in his UFC debut knocked him out. Ibo Aslan, I think he's going to be very fun to watch. And I mean, that's just another big puncher, big kicker. I'm expecting a nice knockout there, even against a guy in Ion Kubaleta who's been around. Feels like he's been around for a while in the UFC, but still kind of on the back end. He did lose like 3 straight, including one to Johnny Walker. So we'll see.
Yep. I'll go with Rob Font and Gene Matsumoto. Kind of sucks for Rob Font that he doesn't get to fight Dominic Cruz. I mean, who doesn't want to fight a legend? Ends up fighting Gene Matsumoto. So he goes from future UFC Hall of Famer to 16-0 prospect with a 2-0 UFC record, who has looked great in both of his UFC fights. Looked great on Contender Series. So like, very ballsy of Rob Font to be like, yeah, I'll fight him. Really interesting fight, because I think Gene Silva's really good. When he fought on Contenders, he was one of my favorite prospects from that season. I think he was in like my top 5, 6, or 7, whatever my highest ranked tier was. So really like Gene Matsumoto. Think he's very good. And Mansour Abdul Malik fighting Nick Klein. Kind of a squash match, but Mansour Abdul Malik, physical specimen, guy to watch off Contenders. I liked him. A little concerned with the cardio, but he's going to be a fun guy to watch regardless. And last one I'll throw out is Andre Touchy-Feely. The man, the pleasure man tried to copy Andre Touchy-Feely's flow. Did not work. Fighting Melchiesa Costa. Costa, I think, is like pretty good for like his win-loss outcomes in the UFC. Not a walk in the park for anybody. And Andre Feely has been, giving fun fights to UFC fans for hell, I don't know how long, but forever. As long as I can remember, Andre Feely has been fighting on the prelims or early on the main card, and you can kind of count yourself in for a good fight. So a lot of respect for Andre Feely, and looking forward to him fight per usual.
I do want to just put out one more guy that I'm more just curious to see. Mr. Van Zant, or as it is, Austin Vanderford, making his UFC debut. He was 11-0, had won a fight on Contender Series earlier on in his career, didn't get a contract, lost 2 of his last 3, but now he's getting his UFC shot. So I'm curious to see how he does in his UFC debut.
Yeah, completely forgot about him when we were talking about Bellator guys who signed. They just randomly signed him on like Tuesday or something.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I was like, yeah, it seemed kind of out of nowhere. So
the last thing I wanted to, you said this is Seattle?
Yep.
Okay, because I think this is really good fight night card and makes sense. You know, it's in Seattle too, so I think this is exciting. And I was gonna say, I'm sure we'll get to talk about this a little bit more. We had so much news to cover, so you know, next week, which I'll be excited because I do really like a lot of these fights. But I think we kind of mentioned when we were planning it out in the beginning of the year, but I think we're starting to hit those that pay-per-view stride where they're all starting to get built up and be looking pretty good with a handful of fights on them. So that's always exciting.
I mean,
And
this card was pretty stacked for a bit before a bunch of cancellations. I think there's been like 7 fights that have been changed up in the last 2-3 weeks for this card.
Yeah, so this card, the cancellations were Blades versus Kunaev was moved. And then it was supposed to be Edson Barbosa versus Steve Garcia. That got canceled. Rob Font versus Dominic Cruz. So those are the 3 big cancellations. So.
Okay. For some reason I thought there was a high-ranked women's one. Wasn't Macy? I mean, it's that division for the women, but it's the featherweight.
Yeah, they're all ranked.
Well, I guess
all 15 of them are ranked.
That's a good point. For some reason I thought it was like 3 versus 4, and in that division, as long as we can get somebody up over Juliana Pena, I don't think.
Yeah. All right. Next week we've got Manel Kape and Asu Amabayev. We'll preview that fight. But the rest of that card is kind of bones. So it gives us a lot of time to recap these fights. So if you wanted UFC Seattle in more detail, we'll be recapping that next week. We'll also have preview up and best bets. I'll have to write tomorrow, which is the day of the fights, but best bets and preview will be up soon. So we have those things as well. Go ahead, Jay.
We have one other fight announcement that I think was this week. I only saw
go for it.
Week. But the man, the myth, the legend, Anthony Smith has announced they have his fight, apparently his retirement fight in April 26th card against Ming Yang Zhang. So there's that
in the UFC.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if he was part of that group that's doing all those like the Uriah Faber, Tyrone Woodley stuff. So, but that's good. Well, because
honestly, it wouldn't be surprising one bit.
Well, I was gonna say I hope it's his retirement fight and he at least gets to do it in the UFC. So, but that's good.
Yeah, they found the scariest Chinese guy who's massive who will knock him the fuck out. They found a guy who is gonna kill him.
The guy who's
oh my god!
I think we talked about it last time he fought the Mountain Tiger.
That's
He's not that good.
By knockout.
He's gonna hit Anthony Smith really hard and put him to sleep. So
yeah.
So.
Said not if my money on Anthony Smith has anything to say about it.
There we go.
Yeah, it'll be plus 1,000. So it's a decent payback for you.
There we go.
Thank you to everyone for tuning into this week's episode of 8-Sided Freaks. Really appreciate everybody listening. Make sure to head to VendettaSportsMedia.com to check out the website and written articles, subscribe, and like the podcast as well. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you next week.